Hey, this is ShawNshawN. I sell art on eBay and on my website, ShawNshawN.co. Today we're going to review The Old Guard. So this is a film. It's 2 hours, 5 minutes, a little long, I think. Directed by Gina Price Brithwood. Has the actors Charlize Theron, kind of one of the leads. Andy, she's also the producer, so she kind of made herself a god figure being the producer. Kiki Lyle is Niall. Matthias Schoenaerts is Booker. Marwan Kanzari is Joe. Luca Marinelli is Nikki, so that's all this kind of immortal team. And Harry Melling is the evil villain Merrick, CEO. So this gang of immortals they work kind of together as a team, and they try to work to save the world and, do certain attacks that'll lead the world in a good way, like save cancer patients or fight in good wars. Then they get trapped by this CEO and they're kind of nabbed off the street. But before you get to that scene, you have they discover this new immortal, and so they rush in and try to save her from her Marine Corps team, and then they get united and then they go to fight this CEO. And that's kind of the crux of the story. So it's kind of a fun concept, I think. There was a few flaws, I think, in the film that kind of bring it down from kind of that A level, I would say. The camera kind of felt kind of like the B team, I would say. It's just they had a lot of different... It's like they didn't have a selected choice. Like if you look at a Kubrick film, he chooses certain lenses for the whole film, or certain kind of... It just has a stylization with the lens. You don't really get that with this film. It just seems like they're using a variety of camera lenses, zoom lenses. That's fine, but it just feels like kind of natural filmmaking without kind of a real selective choice on the camera equipment. So it comes off a little less cinematic that way. Like sometimes there'd be bokeh with the characters, sometimes there wouldn't. So that was kind of interesting, because if you have in focus background, that's not very common nowadays. That's more... maybe in the 50s, 40s kind of cinema look. So they're kind of using that older kind of genre of having the in focus background, which maybe makes sense because the connection goes way back into the mythology. So maybe that's why they're using kind of this older style of more focused. They had a little bit of camera shake here, which seems to be the trend in most movies nowadays. They only have a minimal amount, so it's not too aggravating. Like Jason Bourne was just so over the top with camera shake, it was almost unenjoyable. It's fine on a big screen TV, but you see it in the cinema and you're like, oh my god, what is this? I mean, if you have anything with your eyes, you're just going to be like, have a seizure. But this film just has a little bit, so that's fine. But I think one of the flaws I find nowadays, just in general with action films, is they kind of use the camera shake all through every scene, and it's all handheld, and you're like, are you guys using professional stuff, or are you guys using a DSLR? I have a locked off shot right here. It looks better than the movie, you know what I mean? I think just because you can move with the camera and YouTubers are doing it doesn't necessarily should use it all the time in cinema. I think you got to really strive a balance between the camera shake, locked off shot like this, a pan, a tilt, zoom in, zoom out. And if you use those elements correctly and you only have camera shake in specific areas, it makes the camera shake really stand out. And if you use it all the time, it just becomes really aggravating. A good example of using it maybe appropriately, but I didn't like it because it was a little bit too over the top, was in Loving Vincent. They used it or not Loving Vincent, it was another Vincent van Gogh movie, I forget, with what's the guy's name? Anyway, but this other Vincent van Gogh, they were like running through a field, and it was like, yeah. But most of the film was kind of locked off shot, or kind of zoom in, zoom out. So in that film, it was kind of appropriate because you see they were showing kind of Vincent van Gogh losing his mind, and so they have camera shakes to kind of show this. This film, it just feels like, yeah, they didn't get an A team, so they got a B team with the camera shake. It has to be more symbolism. There wasn't well thought out. Again, kind of that B team kind of feel to it. Yeah, I mean, just that camera shake just feels amateurish to me. I know it feels more real. Maybe it's just a trend now in cinema, but I don't like it per se. I really like the old 80s, 90s film where it had the really smooth, like Steven Spielberg. You have a crane, you pull it through. It looks really much nicer, I think. Then this camera shake thing is just like, it looks cool, but I don't know, it just seems like it's over the top sometimes. Yeah, I mean, one thing I thought that was really good in the film that was over the top was costumes. I thought the costumes were excellent. They seemed really era appropriate, like what they would shoot back in the tribal society, maybe in before medieval times. before the Romans in Europe, and then they moved up to the Middle Ages, the Crusades, and then they moved up a couple of shots. They just used photography of the 1800s, and then on to today. So they have that nice history of costumes, and it really kind of sets that feel to they're actually in those eras. Because if you shoot that wide era, you really have to be really good on your costumes. So I think they did a really great job with the costumes to make that stand out. There was one flaw I felt with the costumes, and that was the CEO outfit. He has kind of a hoodie, but then he has a suit hoodie. It's just this weird kind of contraption. I mean, maybe it's cool in Hollywood, but it's like no one in Silicon Valley works like that. You either wear the hoodie or you don't wear the hoodie, right? You wear the suit or you don't wear the suit. And they had this kind of pseudo thing to use a suit to, you know he's the CEO, but you just have to have the guy come off cocky enough and it'll play that. And he has the kind of the cornball hair of Mark Zuckerberg. So obviously it's kind of rip off of Mark Zuckerberg mixed in with, I don't know, I guess a pharmaceutical company look. So it's just kind of this weird hoodie suit thing, and no one wears that in Silicon Valley, so it just looks weird. I get what they're symbolically doing, but it just looks weird. It just looks out of place. Maybe that works for the rest of America, but if you worked in Silicon Valley, it just looks really goofball. They had this other cool concept of dreams between the different immortals would actually dream between them. So one would dream, and then the other one would have the dream, and then these guys would dream and affect these guys. And you have this lost immortal who's locked in a cage in the bottom of the ocean. So that's really cool. So they play around with that a little bit. I think they could have developed that a little bit more. It was kind of a cool concept, I think. Another part of the B team was kind of the editing. Again, it was just tightly edited. Obviously you want to edit down scenes. It's 2 hours, 5 minutes, so they're trying to cut the fat out of the film. It just felt like they cut out a little bit too much. Sometimes the transitions didn't work. Like I remember specifically there was like a moonshot. So they went from one scene, and then they go to the moonshot, and then they go to kind of like really detailed shot. They should have had kind of a transition shot, and they don't. Like they could have panned from the moon down to where they were, or something with a crane. I think that would have been more effective. So some of the shots were just, it's just really edited really tightly, but it's still 2 hours, 5 minutes, and it felt like some of the scenes, I think they could have cut out more of the scenes and then expanded some of the basic scenes, and I think that would have worked better. So yeah, just this transition shots weren't so great from like, the establishing shot all the way down to the detail. Sometimes it just didn't work in my book as well. But yeah, and it just came off overly long. They had all the scenes they wanted in there, but I think they should have edited down further, to be honest. And some of the scenes they should have kind of aired out. So I think they got everything really tight, but it was too tight, and they didn't air out some of the scenes and cut off the unnecessary parts. So yeah, I mean, if you look at, say, for example, Quentin Tarantino films, there's only a few scenes, but they're really long, and so they really kind of put the film together. And you don't have to do Quentin Tarantino style, obviously, in every film, but some of those elements in this film would have worked better with some of the scenes just having more air, and then cut down the extra scenes and just have, a few simple scenes and have them, just breathe a little more. I think it would have made for a better film. There is a little bit of wokeness in here. You have, which is fine in Hollywood. I mean, they're selling to the LA, California markets, New York markets, so it's fine to show that in a film, I think, because that's where most of the audience is. They're going to sell most of their tickets there. So, the population in the middle of the country is probably 3-4% versus the big city, so that's okay. I mean, when it gets to politics, you don't want to do that, but for film, I think it's okay. And one thing was just they had like these two gay soldiers, and they had this moment they get captured, and they're not going to be killed or anything. They're just in a van. These guys are immortals. Would they be really that? They're just like, oh my God, we have to get the final kiss in. And it's like, they're not even trapped or anything. It didn't make any sense. It's not like a Han Solo moment where like Han Solo is being sent to his death and they kiss, and you're like, wow, that's really dramatic. Like, he might die and never be seen again. Here they're just in the back of a van. They don't know where they're going, obviously, but it's not that dramatic of a scene. So why would these guys that have been around since the Crusades be like, oh no, it's the end? Like, they've probably been in worse situations before, right? So I think they would just be more hard edge, even though they're gay characters, that's fine. But I think they would have just been hard edge, they didn't really show the appropriateness of the character. The character would just be more hard edge, being around that long. Like you see that in the vampire series, the characters are really dark and sinister and just really tough ass, and they're really hard and leathery feel to the character, and that they kind of just add a little bit too much softness here. And so I kind of would have cut that back. It's fine if they're gay, but that scene didn't make any sense to me. There's also kind of female Marines, which I guess is a thing since 2013, so it's not off kilter with reality, but does it make sense in that, in the myth it makes sense, like you have Joan of Arc, or you have tribal scenes like a Xenia shot. It's fine, it's fantasy, but then once you get to the real reality, it's kind of like you should shoot that more the reality with more behind the scenes. I mean, I know they're getting more mixed in, but the reality is the physical part is going to be the guy still, I think. So, that's a little bit wokeness there, which I don't know if it make any sense. It's a film, so it doesn't really matter. But again, if you push that too hard, it just kind of, people just like, that's not the reality. Anyone that's a soldier is going to be like, come on, man. So yeah, I think that's a little woke in that sense, but what it is. It's a Hollywood film, right? I did look back at the older films. They had this Old Guard. It was a couple, but none of the titles had anything to do with this one. So this was just a brand new cut. It's not anything off of those old films. I didn't really like the name, the Old Guard. It just seemed like such a dorky name for Immortals. I mean, like the Immortal Team, or I don't know what you would call them, but the Immortals would be a better name, or I don't know, just something that would make more sense. Another thing that's kind of quirky too is there's no explanation of why they're immortal. These guys, one of the Immortals has been around since before Rome, and she doesn't even know anything about the Immortals, so it doesn't make any sense. Like, you had thousands of years, you wouldn't know anything about it. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You would, like, after 100 years, you might get a little curious and history hungry, right? But, I guess, so they leave that a little bit open-ended, so that kind of seems a little goofy. It makes sense for, like, when you do vampires, and the vampires don't know where they come from, but the older vampires should know, like, their history. And this doesn't seem like the lead character, who's been around 1,000 or 2,000 years, doesn't even know her own history. That kind of seems dumb in a way. So I think it should have been more of a snappy character, or, like, just a smartass, and more like, boom, I know this. Shut up, you whippersnappers, kind of like bark down. I think it would, a little not as soft as they played it. And it's weird because Charlize Theron is played in Mad Max, and she plays a total freaking badass, right? And that role feels like how you would be in a dystopia era. And if you're hunted down as a minority, but you're immortal, you would have that freaking hard edge badass to you. And she does kind of play it, but it's much softer than, say, her Mad Max role. So in that case, the Mad Max role seemed more believable, even though that's obviously a huge fantasy off the top with the fantastical world of Mad Max. So I think that could have been played a little harder from my aspect. Same with the two gay characters, that would have been harder edge. It's just that team should have been another level up for the hard edge. And then the new person, who's this new black kid who's immortal, she could be softer because she doesn't know what she's getting into. She's still a Marine, so she's kind of transitioning, right? That makes sense. But the other guy should be more hard edge and just more crisper on the edges, I think. Like in The Matrix, those characters are really crisper on the edges, you'd say, versus Neo. He's like, what the hell is all this stuff? You guys are crazy, right? And they're like, kid, you'll learn. And so the jadedness in the Matrix is played much better than, say, this film. But overall, I think it's a decent film. If there wasn't COVID, I don't know if it would have made it to the cinema or not, per se. It definitely seems like it would have just fell a little bit under the radar as far as, the execs would have seen it and be like, do we want to show this? I mean, if it was a soft weekend with other films that weren't going to be that great, then yeah, it probably would have came out in the cinema. So it's hard to say if it would have came out in the cinema or not. And I think now, we're still kind of in the lockdown area, so it's just like they're releasing what they can, like probably films that may not have, like that film might have come out 6 months from now, like in a really soft area, like maybe in a January or February when it's usually the soft area. But because they didn't have anything, they just went through their whole thing. No one wanted to release into the blockbuster films. They're pushing that out until the cinemas really reopen, if they reopen. So all the stuff that was planned for like July, August got just canceled. And they're just like, we'll throw in this film that was supposed to be next year, but we pulled it up way up front. And that might be why the editing's off and the color grading's not there, is because they just kind of quickly ran through that film and pulled it up front. I don't know. That's just my feel on it. But anyway, I think it's an enjoyable film. It's a Netflix, or I think it's Netflix. I want to say it's a Netflix film. Maybe it's on Prime, but it's part of Prime, so whatever, it doesn't cost you extra, so it's fun. I wouldn't say it's over the top. It's definitely nothing Oscar worthy, but the costumes are pretty good. So that's my take on the film. Thanks. See you guys next time.